Hello again, my American Studies 340 students. This is Professor Donald Collins. Again, this is part two of a two-part video lecture summary for week 5 of the course. So I left off talking about this history of the eugenics movement, standardized testing, and ability grouping, and how the three intertwine in K-12 and to some extent K-16 education as well. The cultural and racist biases contained within standardized testing, and as these tests evolve and there are more and more tests involved. So you're basically on two tracks. You're trying to do diagnostic testing to give you some sense of where your students are as kindergartners, as first graders, as fifth graders, as eighth graders, as high schoolers, even as they're in 12th grade and get ready to go to college. So, so that we have an idea of what they know and what they don't know. But at the same time, we're using these exams more and more to also prove that how smart Johnny is and how smart Jane is, so that they can get higher maths and higher sciences and go off to elite colleges like AU, or for that matter, Ivies like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Cornell, Brown, UPenn, and Columbia, but Berkeley and University of Michigan and other places like that as well. So anyway, right? The rise of high-stakes testing, there's always been some high-stakes testing in K-12, but the rise of high-stakes testing takes hold as more and more schools there's this debate about this trying to close the gap, the academic achievement divide between whites and other students of color, because of national and international exams that show that all students in the United States have been falling behind their peers around the world. The TIMSS exam, that's an international exam. The NAEP exam, which is a national exam that's has been administered in the States since 1969, right? All these exams have shown decline. So we need to have an act that basically says we need to do more around testing. We need to do more diagnoses of where students are so that we can, make sure that students graduate with the skills needed to work in the modern 21st century economy. So they can work on a computer and use a smartphone and program stuff and do STEM fields. All that's wrapped up, and all of it's very political. It's wrapped around the politics of race, but it's also around the politics of what employers consider important, right? Which is, after all, the whole reason education is important, right? It's because of what employers think, not because what society thinks. Mind you, that's sarcasm on my part, but in point of the fact that is part of a shift that's been going on since the end of the 1950s, with the National Defense Act of 1950, which was passed to basically provide federal dollars to schools at the local and state level around science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM fields, right? Who cares if you can write? Who cares if you've got great calligraphy or you can play a violin like a virtuoso? Who cares if you're erudite and can give good speeches or write really well, right? Or understand history? Those are things that they're important, but we need you to be a good little scientist here. So it's all wrapped up in those kinds of politics around the curriculum, around whether we should provide enough funding for teachers and classrooms, and make sure teachers are well equipped to deal with their students. Forget about other public investments in things like mental health facilities, public housing, making sure people have enough food to eat. All those other things that have been sort of exposed by COVID and the pandemic. Have been exposed over the years by what's been happening in education too. So the result of things like No Child Left Behind, which most educators call No Child Gets Ahead, or No Child Has a Behind Left after this act was passed, joking around but kind of serious, has been the advent of all these tests. There are layers of testing now. Schools have their own sets of tests as individual schools. County and school district have their own set of tests as counties and school districts for diagnosis and assessment. You'll have state level like exams that students have to take from time to time, and then there are national ones like PARCC, where half the states in the country have a regional exam basically that students have to take every so often to see where they are. And so you have all of this testing going on. I counted up for my own kid in Montgomery County Public Schools when he was in elementary school, and even to some extent in sixth and seventh grade when he was in middle school. He was taking a high-stake test roughly once every 6 weeks while he was in school. So that adds up to something like 8 exams a year. He was taking 8 exams a year from the time he was basically in second grade until he finished eighth grade actually. So he did like 3 or 4 of them in first grade. He did 2 of them as a kindergartner. I mean, seriously, what are you testing a kindergartner for? That he knows 1 through 10 and he can know his ABCs and read a couple Dick and Jane sentences, really? But anyway, that's my point. High stakes testing, and with that has come goodies for people who've done well on these exams and detriments for people who haven't done so well on these exams. Again, with ability grouping. There are 2 books that are on your list that are really important to not just understand, from the testing side of things, but the impact it has on students. One is Jeannie Oakes' book, Keeping Track. It is still the best book you can ever possibly look at to understand the connection between standardized testing and ability grouping. It was written in 1985, but it might as well have been written this year. She revised it and put it out as a 20th year anniversary edition in 2005. It concludes unequivocally that schools have consistently used testing not just as a means of a diagnostic means to help students, but mostly to hurt students, to put them on different tracks. And those tracks tend to be permanent for most students. So if you are on a gifted and talented track, whether it's a magnet program or advanced placement or international baccalaureate, you've been on that track pretty much since the middle of elementary school. If you find yourself in gifted and talented as sort of a special education student or someone who has some sort of minor mental disabilities, whether it's dyslexia, or you just have ADHD, which makes it harder for you to learn, or Asperger's, where you are really smart, but you can't really show it because you're not socially. This form of autism makes it so that your social situations are rather difficult for you. You're not that stuff doesn't always show up in terms. It shows up in terms of your exams, but doesn't show how intelligent you really are, obviously. So you end up on the wrong track. That's what Jeannie Oakes' book shows. And that coupled with Christopher Jinks's classic Inequality from 1972, I know, 48 years ago. I'm going back to a book that was published when I was barely 3, right? 2.5, 3 years old. Book says what every major research paper and research article has shown over the last 45 years. If you are in the middle class, and if you are white, or if you're affluent and you are white, schools help you reproduce that social mobility for you so that the schools are designed for you, which means the tests are designed for you, which means if you do all of these tests, you and your kids will track well through public schools, parochial schools, private schools, and on to college, and so on and so forth. Schools basically reproduce inequality in a nutshell. And if you are not if you're not in those socioeconomic categories, generally speaking, it is much, 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 much harder for you to achieve any form of social mobility. So much so that it's almost to the point of impossibility. So that's what you're looking at when you're looking at all this stuff for the readings this week. You're looking at this whole history, but you're also looking at what groups have done to try to fight this, what researchers have said could be ways to try to deal with this situation. One of the ways, of course, is to not do so much testing. Maybe we should concentrate on making sure students can get what they can get out of school and learn. Just a novel idea there, but let's use the test so that we can help students and not hurt them. Let's not do so much ability grouping at such young ages, as young as second and third grade, or 7 and 8 year olds are being told that they're gifted at 7 and 8 when they're just all right. They're doing better than their colleagues, but there's no magic bullet that says an 8-year-old's going to turn out to be a massive engineer, right? So why are we telling kids at 7 or 8, oh, you're gifted, oh, you can do whatever you want, or telling some other 7 or 8-year-old like yours truly, you're never going to amount to anything, right? Which is the converse of that because you didn't do so well on your standardized test as a second grader. It's ridiculous. So anyway, that's the gist of what we're doing for this week, and it leads to some of the stuff we're going to talk about next week regarding the role of teachers in all of this as agents of social control or as agents of social radicalism for that matter. So anyway,